Canada first to label China's treatment of Uigurs as genocide, which has Beijing steaming. This is the Great White North Report. Alright, last week Canada became the first nation to label China's treatment of Uigurs a genocide, which is amazing considering that the Uighurs are Muslim and no Muslim countries have come forward stepping up. China's cultural eradication of their Islamic majority amounts to genocide, a Canadian parliamentary subcommittee concludes. And we became the first government to call a spade this week and label the CCP's treatment of the Uighurs as a genocide. This is nothing new, and it's taken that long to figure it out. Now, this is amount to cultural and literal annihilation. The Subcommittee on International Human Rights on the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development in the Canadian Parliament has designated atrocities by the Chinese government against the Uyghur people, East Turkestan, to be a genocide in line with the UN Genocide Convention. That committee has a lot of words, needs to shorten it. So it came to the conclusion after hearing 2 days of testimony from witnesses that include survivors of the government of China's atrocities in the region. So what happened next? Beijing erupted at Canada because the Commons Committee says camps, forced labor, population control measures are designed to eradicate Uyghur culture. So the committee's report states that China's persecution of this Muslim minority through mass detentions and concentration camps, forced labor, state surveillance, and population control measures is a clear violation of human rights and is meant to eradicate the Uyghur culture and religion. They didn't even know what a Uyghur was until 4 years ago. And he agrees with experts who say China's campaign against the Uighurs meets the definition of genocide set out by the 1948 Genocide Convention. Now, the Chinese Foreign Ministry lashed out at Canada. Zhao Lijian said today this so-called genocide is a rumor and a farce fabricated by some anti-Chinese forces to slander China. He's trying to do doublespeak there. It's a groundless statement, it's full of lies and disinformation, warning parliamentarians to avoid doing any further damage to China-Canada relations. Like they're not damaged enough. Might as well jump in the deep end and do it all. He goes on to say this is a blatant interference in China's internal affairs and reflect those Canadian individuals' ignorance and prejudice. China firmly deplores and rejects that. Really? Prejudice, eh? See the chick shoving a black guy in a washing machine? Comes out as a Chinese guy? That's not prejudice? Now, Liberal MP Peter Fonseca heard from witnesses who survived the concentration camps China has built to suppress Muslims living in this oil-rich northwestern province. So it is a strategic province for the Chinese, and they want firm control over it and its assets. Now, the witnesses described deplorable conditions where they are physiologically, physically, and sexually abused and subjected to forced assimilation and indoctrination into the dominant Chinese culture. Amazing how the Chinese forget the rape of Nanking. Asked about the camps, Zhao insisted they are vocational and educational centers. Religious extremists were educated in national common spoken and written language, legal knowledge, and vocational skills and de-radicalization. The aim is to eliminate the root cause of terrorism and extremism. So they're using terrorism and extremism to persecute their own people, or what they claim to be their own people. But our Commons Committee concluded that Chinese communist officials forcibly sterilized Uyghur women, girls, and pushed abortions. Utratuine used contraceptive devices on thousands in a systematic attempt to persecute and possibly eradicate Uyghurs. They make up less than 1% of the population in a country where Mandarin-speaking ethnic Chinese, the Han, constitute the overwhelming majority. Chinese government documents obtained by the committee show that approximately 80% of all the new IUD replacements in China took place in Xinjiang. Birth rates have plummeted across the region, falling 24%, compared to a drop of just 4.2% nationwide. Population control measures are backed by mass detention, both as a threat and as a punishment for failure to comply. Now, witnesses say they're going through poverty reduction measures, as implemented by Beijing, that forced Uyghurs into camps to perform slave labor, making products that were to be sold in Canada and other Western nations. I go find out what companies in Canada were using those products and sanction the hell out of them. Uyghurs were for sale. Thousands of Muslims have been used as forced labor in factories to supply companies like BMW, there we go, Nike and Huawei, among others. Well, I don't buy Nike shoes under any circumstances. I'm not going to buy a Huawei. And BMW, well, I like my Ford truck better. So they facilitated mass transfer of Uyghurs and other ethnic minority citizens from Xinjiang to factories across the country. Where have I seen that before? Wasn't that Schindler's List? And then under the Nazis? They're under constant state surveillance through closed-circuit television cameras, mobile tracking devices, and the survivors said they've lived in constant fear. Uyghur expatriates are subject to harassment and intimidation by the Chinese regime, even in Canada. That I can attest to. So This subcommittee condemned the persecution by the government of China, and it announced a genocide, which it does. So this was back in July. Dozens of MPs and senators called for sanctions against China over human rights abuses. I don't know why Trudeau and the Liberal government haven't taken that step. Problem is they're a minority government and they need support from others. You'd think the NDP would be on board with that because they're supposed to be representing the workers of Canada as opposed to the workers in China. We should be able to use the Magnitsky Act to target Chinese communist officials and companies that do business in Xinjiang, for sure. Now, when 68 MPs and senators have added their names to a letter to the Prime Minister demanding that Canada levy sanctions on top Chinese officials in response to human rights abuses against the Uyghur Muslims and pro-democracy advocates in Hong Kong. Amazing, our Muslims here don't care. I haven't heard anything from them. War from Iran, Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, Egypt, Morocco, Algeria, Libya, like Indonesia, all over the Muslim world there hasn't been a voice that I've seen. So it's signed by two Liberal backbenchers, Judy Sergro and John McKay. MPs from other parties include the Green Party, Elizabeth May, who's now, and a substantial portion of the Conservative caucus. Two appointments to the Senate, Mary-Lou McPhadren and Pierre Dalfond. Of Trudeau's appointments, they've signed it too. So Trudeau's own party wants him to do this. And Peter MacKay said there's no accommodation that you can make with China. China's violation of human rights should be countered by financial maneuvers that hit its officials where it hurts. Of course, we got like thousands of little Chinese communist kids here going to our schools. Put them in a concentration camp and see how they like it. Turn the screw the other way. Not something I want to, not a rabbit hole I really want to go down, but if that's what it takes, then so be it. We did it with the Japanese, unfortunately. Which was a mistake, I think, at the time, but this would be a little different situation. So he goes on to say that he was a little slow in coming around, McKay was, in the belief that China's abuses, its arbitrary detention of Kovrig and Spavor must be met with some sort of response beyond diplomacy. Diplomacy is not working. China's a colossal bully, as an emergent power, and the only way to deal with a bully, and there's only one way to deal with a bully. He's quite right. Meanwhile, a think tank urges China to release Canadian employee Michael Kovrig. Who cares about Spavor? President of the International Crisis Group, he used a high-level UN Security Council meeting attended by the China's foreign minister to appeal for the release of think tank's Northeast Asian expert Kovrig, who is being held by the CCP. Kovrig was the highest Canadian official or name they could find at the time. That's why they arrested him. Robert Malley told the council at the end of his briefing on security in the Persian Gulf that the crisis group strives to be an impartial conflict resolution organization, and his staff tries to understand the perspective of all parties. Kovrig was doing his work on China's foreign policy. He said it wasn't the time or place to discuss Kovrig's case, but I can't conclude without appealing to Chinese authorities that they're listening to understand. The mission he was pursuing ended his almost 2-year detention. Now, the Chinese foreign minister Wang Yi heard China mention, he looked up and started paying attention, which means he doesn't pay attention to these things. Well, he turns his translator off. But of course he makes no mention of Kovrig in his speech to the council. German ambassador Christian Hig did echo Malley's appeal to liberate Michael Kovrig. Surprise, they're so economically dependent on China right now to buy cars that they haven't moved anything. He said that because he's not only a member of the International Crisis Group, but a former colleague of ours, a former diplomat. In Britain's acting ambassador, Jonathan Allen, he said the same thing. Kovrig's case causes a deep concern. Detaining a couple of their diplomats. Pull ours out of China, pull our embassy over to Taiwan, and start arresting the Chinese diplomats. See what happens. Now, we can use the Magnitsky law in Canada, which is called the Justice for Victims of Corrupt Foreign Officials Act. We've had this since 2015, and we can use this to apply to the Uigurs, the Mongolians, Hong Kong, and anything else we decide. And it's time we look at sanctioning the hell out of the Chinese Communist Party, because they do own a lot of real estate in Canada, and do have a certain amount of control over our companies. And it's time to hit back strong and hard, and start rebuilding our military before it's too late. Anyway, any Canadians out there, let me know what you guys think, and put your comments in the section below. Until next time, this has been the Great White North Report.